Welcome and thank you for joining me for this webinar that's going to cover the sensitive topic of terminations when it's time to say goodbye. I think terminations are probably the most uncomfortable situation that we face as supervisors and managers, but they don't always have to be as uncomfortable as we make them. It's not actually you that makes the decision on terminations, and that the employee is far more in control of their fate than you are. And I think that's one of the things that we face. It's guilt, and I think guilt is actually a good emotion at times, but also sometimes it's misplaced, and we're just going to discuss that a little bit as part of our training today. First of all, let's talk about a couple of precautions. When you're talking about termination, we're talking about taking an employment action, and whenever you take an employment action, our ears in HR kind of perk up. We want to make sure that it's done in a way that is legally defensible, that is consistent, fair, legal, that it covers, that it checks all the blocks. We want to make sure that your decision to terminate somebody is well-founded and that it will go with as little problem as possible for you. So what are some of the precautions? Well, first of all, take a look at the documentation. Do you have a lot of documentation on this particular issue? Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, Dave, this is a right-to-work state, so I can just terminate somebody here in Alabama. I can just terminate somebody and it's done. I'm protected by the law. And you're absolutely right. You can terminate somebody for any reason, good or bad. However, that is not to say that that person that's terminated for any reason, good or bad, doesn't go to a law firm with that bad decision to terminate and find a way to sue you and take away some of the revenues that you work so hard to put into your company coffers. So what we're going to try to do is make sure that we give the employee every opportunity to be restored as an effective worker in the workplace, and we are going to show documentation that we did that. Now, let's talk about documentation for a moment, since we're talking about precautions. You need to grab on to a truth, and that is this. If you don't document behavior, if you don't document disciplinary problems, they didn't happen. Now you're saying to yourself, well, yes, they did. No, they didn't. Well, yes, they did. No, they didn't. And of course, what I'm saying is, for the purpose of defending yourself in some sort of legal proceeding, if you don't have documentation, you really don't have a leg to stand on. That said, there are times when the offense is so severe that you will take an action to terminate the person right then and there. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, how in the world do I know when it is that I'm going to give them a warning? How do I know when I just terminate them on the spot? How do I know? And the good news is that we here at Lions HR exist to help you with those decisions, and your regional HR manager can provide you with consulting, and we can take it as far as we need to get a good, solid, legally defensible answer. We do have attorneys that we can consult, but I'll tell you what, there are decades of experience represented here in these offices, and we are eager to help you make a wise decision when it comes to the employment action that's appropriate given that unique set of circumstances, and every circumstance is indeed unique. So don't be afraid to get on the phone and talk to us before you make that employment decision. Why? Because after you make it, now the person has something actionable that they can hold you accountable for, whereas if we talk about it before, we will set you on a good path right from the outset. So let's just summarize in terms of precautions. Make sure that behavior is documented, and also make sure that you contact Lions HR to consult before you take an employment action. Those are the primary precautions that you want to take. Now let's come to this question. Who makes the decision? Now you're thinking to yourself, Dave, what kind of question is that? I'm the supervisor. I'm the manager. Of course I make the decision whether to keep somebody on board or to fire them? Well, not really. Why do I say that? Because if you are documenting the employee's behavior, that means that, let's say they come in late and you talk to them, just verbally you talk to them, you don't write anything down. The second time they come in late, you bring them in, you talk to them, but this time you write it down in the form of a written verbal warning. They come in late again. This time you write it out as a final warning. Once again, now this is the fourth time that the person has come in late. You let them know, you kind of have a, walk towards the light kind of a talk with them and say, look, you're forcing me to make a decision that I do not want to make, and that is that if you continue to come in late and cause this team to be stressed because of your absence, I will have no choice but to take the action of terminating you. I don't want to do that. So I guess my question is, are you really serious about this job? Do you really want this job? And if so, why are you having difficulty getting to work? What is it that is causing you to show up late? So these are some of the things that go into the decision about terminating the person. Did you make the decision for the person to come in late? No, you didn't. In fact, you warned them over and over and over again to make it in on time. So if that person gets terminated for tardiness, whose decision is that? It's theirs. It is the employee's decision. So let's talk about guilt. As a supervisor or manager, if a person chooses to come in late 4 times, 5 times, is that a reason for you to feel guilty about terminating them? No, you're just the messenger. They're the ones that brought the news. Okay? So you don't want to worry about the decision to terminate somebody because they are going to make that decision for you. Now let's take a look at this in a different light. What if you did not document the absences or the tardiness? Then the 5th time the person comes in, you call up Lions HR and say, well, Joe Schneebly, he came in late for the 5th time. And we'll say, okay, well, it sounds like you have a solid reason to terminate. Go ahead and send us the documentation. And you say, well, what documentation? What are we going to say? They never came in late. Why is that? Because there's no documentation to support it. So we want to make sure that we document everything. Now, what is the purpose in the first place of doing employee discipline? What is the point of it? Employee discipline has a twofold purpose. And if you can grab onto this, it will really help to clarify your purpose as a supervisor or as a manager. The twofold purpose of progressive discipline is, number one, to restore the employee to be a productive member of your team, or the second purpose is to show them the door. So you're telling them this is how to be a successful employee, but if they refuse to follow your advice, this documented advice, then they are escorting themselves to the door. You're simply the one that's going to open it and guide them through. So the person that makes the decision about termination is the employee. There's no doubt about it. So then if they're making the decision to terminate themselves, then what's your role as a supervisor? Your role is to be a mirror of their performance. You tell them when they're doing good. You let them know, hey, this is exactly the performance that I love to see. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work. Or you can say, hey, let's go have a talk. And in the presence of a member of management as a witness, you want to talk about things. Hey, I have a concern about this. And you talk about it and follow the steps of progressive discipline in order to address off-course behavior. So your role is simply to be a mirror. You let the employee know how they're doing. So what does that mean? That means you have to open your mouth. You have to talk to the employee. You have to have that one-on-one time where you reflect back to them, how are they doing? Are they doing good? Are they doing poorly? Do you want them to do something else other than what they're doing? We can't just sit there and seethe with anger about an employee's behavior if we never give them feedback about how they can improve. And that's a very, very important part of your role as a supervisor or manager. It follows then that if you are going to be giving them feedback on their performance, then you need to know what their job description is, right? Of course. If you don't know what's expected of the employee, what your company is paying them to do, then how can you hold them accountable and give them feedback on how they're doing? It just makes sense. So if you have not yet read and kind of internalized your employee's job description, then that is the first step before you ever start thinking about disciplining them. The next question is, when do I call HR? I don't think that you could call HR too soon when it comes to disciplining an employee. You may have a lot of experience, but I'll bet that you are not as up to date on legislation and interpretations of laws and all of those kinds of things as we may be here. Maybe you are, and if so, congratulations. But if you have any doubt as to the legality or legal defensibility of an action that you're considering with an employee, then you should give us a call so that we can at least consult. I used to be a director of human resources at a company of about 400 or more employees, and one of the things that I described my job as is being on the bottom line. We'll be on the bottom line for that decision. In other words, we put ourselves in the area of responsibility where we will advise you to the best of our ability on a good, sound decision-making plan so that you can have more confidence in the employment actions that you take. So when do I call HR? Call us just as soon as you're considering any kind of disciplinary action with an employee that you have any doubts about. There are multiple types of terminations. No two terminations are the same. So I wanted to talk about a few of the different kinds. Let's talk about terminating a person because they are simply not fulfilling their job responsibilities. Now, you want to make sure that you have done your part in equipping the employee to do their job, and that means that you have to be able to say with utmost confidence that I have trained this employee to standard. If you train the employee to standard, then there are only two alternatives. Either the employee cannot do the job or they will not do the job. Those are the only two options. If they're failing to do a satisfactory job, then they either cannot or will not do the job. That is, if you have done good training. What is good training? Real simple. 3 steps. The first is you train the employee. And that doesn't mean just shoving a piece of paper in front of them and say, read this and sign the bottom. That's not training. Good solid training is where you describe the task, you demonstrate the task, you allow the employee to practice with you right there by their side, and then you observe the employee doing the task to standard during a peak period. All right? Let me just summarize the 3 steps. First is you train the employee. Number 2 is you test the employee. And number 3 is you observe the employee performing the task to standard during a peak period. Now think about it. If you observe an employee performing a task perfectly to standard during the fastest, highest volume time of your day, can you not hold them accountable now for every situation? Yes, absolutely. And I would suggest that when you do observe them, that you talk to them about it. Hey, Bill, hey, Mary, I just observed you, and that is exactly what I expect of you. You did a perfect job. That's what I want. That's what I want to see from now on, and that's what I'm going to hold you accountable for. Now, there are other types of terminations. What about terminations where the person simply doesn't show up for work? Now, I've never had that experience, but I've heard stories that sometimes employees just up and don't come to work. Yeah, I have had that experience. So what is the standard for a person just not showing up for work? The standard is 3 days consecutive where they don't show up for work constitutes job abandonment, and that would be the advice we would give, is to document when the person doesn't come in and to talk to us about it. Why do I say talk to you about it? Isn't that an open and shut case? Not necessarily. We have to look at the reason that they didn't come in, and that means that we need to consult your regional HR manager about it. What if they had some sort of a medical issue? Then that could kind of activate certain laws that protect the employee. What if they couldn't notify you? Those sorts of things. So we stand ready to advise you on all the myriad of different kinds of situations that you're going to encounter. Now, what about the employee who is insubordinate? Well, first of all, we need to discuss what insubordination is. Insubordination is refusing to do what you ask the employee to do. So the question is then, where do I draw the line? Well, we have to understand, why is the employee refusing to do the task? Have we documented their insubordination? One of the things that I often see on counseling reports is the term attitude. Employee displayed a bad attitude. Employee got an attitude with me. I never ever want to see the word attitude on a counseling form. And the reason is because you cannot quantify, you cannot measure an attitude. However, you can quantify and measure the things, the physical things or the words or the actions that the employee took. For example, instead of saying, employee got an attitude with me, you could say, on November 16th, 2014, Bill Smith, when asked to perform his duties as a line cook, threw his hands up in the air, made a huffing sound, and stormed away from me without saying anything and did not perform his tasks. Okay, now what are the things that are measurable there? Is his throwing his hands up in the air, is that observable? Is that measurable? Yes. Making a huffing sound, yes, I can hear that. Storming away, yes, that is something that I can see. So now you're painting a much clearer picture of what actually happened instead of the more ambiguous attitude. So insubordination, I cannot speak in blanket terms over what constitutes insubordination sufficient to terminate an employee. This is something that you should be in close consultation with your regional HR manager over, or your on-site HR manager. There are other circumstances that may result in termination as well, probably as many as there are employees. But these are some of the ones that occur the most. Probably the most difficult one, I think, is something like a layoff or a drawdown or something along those lines. And in those cases, absolutely, you need to consult with HR so that we make sure we check all the blocks and we treat your employees legally, fairly, and consistently in those kinds of regrettable but sometimes unavoidable circumstances. So when it comes to guidelines, what kind of guidelines would I give a manager that's considering terminations? Let me suggest, first of all, that you understand the circumstance that the employee finds himself in and make sure that you flavor everything that you do with respect. If you're having a conversation with an employee and you know that you're going to terminate them, then this is not the time to have a discussion. This should not be a time where they're surprised by anything. This should not be a time where you argue over the facts. This is going to come as no surprise to the employee if you have done progressive discipline and documented their behavior. They should know this coming in. So we don't have to be angry. We don't have to be spiteful. We don't want to be sarcastic in our tone or in our words. We don't want to be biting or caustic. We want to make sure that we treat the employee with respect. My goal as an HR director was that I would be able to bump into a person that I had actually terminated in Walmart or any other store and say, hey, how are you doing? Shake their hand, have a talk with them, and go on my way. Why? Because the termination's not personal. This is business. It kind of reminds me of The Godfather. This is business. This is not personal. So let's not make it personal. We terminate the person. Now, what about them getting their stuff or saying goodbye to fellow employees and that kind of stuff? I think that this should be done quietly, and it should be done out of the view of other employees. So I would wait for a time when you could escort the employee to their locker to get their things and then to their car so that you see them all the way on out. What we don't want to do is parade them in front of other employees so everybody's looking at them. We don't want them to be embarrassed or shamed in any way. What are some other guidelines? Make sure that your documentation is in place. Make sure that you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. I would suggest to have your counseling forms already filled out and ready to sign. You don't want to be writing things. That's kind of an awkward silence at that point. Don't worry about if the employee refuses to sign. You're going to have a witness in the room when you're performing the termination, and that witness should not speak. And why is that? Because if that witness speaks, it feels like you're ganging up on the employee. So that witness, who's a member of management, is going to be instructed, I want you to be there, I want you to observe, but I do not want you to speak. Now, that doesn't mean you can't say, hey, good afternoon, or something like that, but from that point on, you're not speaking. You don't chime in or say anything. So the witness is there, and you talk to the employee about it. You mention the other counselings, and undoubtedly the other counseling dates will be written on the termination counseling form, and then you give it to the employee for them to sign. If they say, well, I'm not going to sign that, then you simply go to their signature block and you write these words, refused to sign, and then you print and sign your name beside that phrase, refused to sign. And then the witness will print and sign their name and put the date, of course, so that there are two witnesses to the fact that you gave the counseling. Understand that when a person signs counseling, they're not saying, yeah, I agree with everything on this counseling. They're just saying that they got it. Sometimes, though, employees feel like somehow they're getting back at you by not signing off on it, or they have some sort of a more defensible position by not signing it. Don't let that anger you. Don't let that upset you. Just know what you're going to do, and that is that both of you will sign off on it. I've seen this happen multiple times. It's not a big deal. So we want to treat the employee with respect. We want to be prepared. We want to have the counseling written out, ready to go. You want to have a witness there in the room, and you want to have consulted with your regional HR manager or your in-house HR professional so that you are sure about the actions that you are taking. Make sure that you go into this confidently. The more confident you are, the better it's going to go. The more answers that you have going in, the less you'll feel uneasy and nervous. Once again, I can't overemphasize this issue of respect. We don't want things to be personal. We got to a point, okay, you're going to part ways with us, but that doesn't mean that the employee's a bad person. That simply means that they weren't a good fit here. But I've said this phrase, I am sure you're going to land on your feet. I'm sure you're going to do great things. I'm sorry it didn't work out here. And I've even gone so far as to say, you know, on a personal level, I'm going to miss you. I enjoyed having you around. But there's a principle I want you to grab onto here. And it's the KISS principle. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. You don't want to extend this out. Make it to the point, clear, concise, short. Don't get all wordy. Don't go on and on and on. Just do what has to be done and be done with it. Okay, that you're going to find that is a better way to proceed. But always do this with respect. Unfortunately, we have to talk about security. I am sure that as you think about security, and specifically I'm talking about workplace violence, I'm sure that there are some people, maybe just one or two, but there are some people you think, man, if I had to terminate this person, I'd be scared. And I would listen to that little voice. There was one time where I had to terminate somebody and I didn't know how it was going to go. So I didn't take any chances. I called the local police and I talked with the officer before the employee got there, and I said, look, I am not sure about this employee. I'm not sure how they're going to react. I would like to buy you a cup of coffee, and I would just appreciate if you would sit over there. I'm going to talk to the employee over here, and I would just appreciate you being here. So we did it. Absolutely no problems whatsoever. The employee left. I thanked the officer, and and off we went. But take steps to make sure that you're secure. If you have any question, don't hesitate to coordinate, additional security. Make sure that you talk with your leadership and your on-site HR professional. If you are using HR here at Lions and you don't have anybody there on site, then give us a call. Talk to us about that, and we will give you some advice on how you can have the most secure situation. We don't want anybody to have problems. When we're talking about security, let's also talk about this. Remember, I just got done talking about respect. I think that if you treat employees with respect all the way through, and you are consistent with them, and you give them feedback, and you give them consistent progressive discipline, you document things, you're going to find less instances of people getting upset and angry and having outbursts and that sort of thing. So take security seriously. If you have any doubts, make sure that you know that you have as secure a situation as possible. Escorting the employee to their locker and then to their car is another way of making sure that everything goes as planned. And don't hesitate to talk with your company leaders if you anticipate that there may be a problem that could endanger you or your fellow employees, and make sure that you have proper security in place. So those are a few things about terminations. I can't answer every question about terminations today. I hope you didn't expect me to, but I wanted to touch on a few things and let you know that terminations really are the decision of the employee. They make the call about whether they're going to stay with you or they're going to find another place to work. We want to make sure that documentation is always complete, always consistent. Make sure that you call Lions HR earlier rather than later. Make sure that you call before you take that employment action, or at least that you consult with HR before you take employment actions. And then always treat employees with respect and make sure that you take steps to ensure that everybody is secure in situations where you have any kind of doubt. Thank you for joining me for this webinar on terminations. Have a great day.